All right, family. I want to welcome you to the Do Work Podcast, where we live by one motto and one motto only. That is just simply doing the work. You want to change your life, do the work. So today we're going to talk about trauma, and I titled this podcast "Screw Your Trauma." And something very interesting happened to me today. I was driving to the store. My mother calls me out of nowhere. And she's like, well, actually, I called her. But she says to me, she said, I've been really meaning to talk to you. There's a lot on my mind and I want to apologize. And I'm like, apologize? I said, for what? She said, I've been making a round. So if you guys don't know, I'm one of six. She said, I've been making my rounds and apologizing to all of my children. But she said, I just wanted to tell you I'm sorry for not being there for you growing up and standing up for you more. And I'm like, Mom, where's this coming from? What are you talking about? She said, well, I've been talking to your siblings and they've been saying to me that they feel I haven't been there for them. And in your case, there's one particular instance with your uncle, my Uncle Kwame, may he rest in peace. He's now deceased. But she said, where your Uncle Kwame, was giving you problems and I did not intervene or stand up for you. So just to give you guys a little backstory, let's start here. So the situation with my Uncle Kwame was this. I don't know. It's maybe about 15 or 16. I did go to boarding school. Shout out to Girard College. I did go to boarding school. I was home for the weekend. And as I remember it, I came home. There were about 8 or 9 of us in the house. It was like my mom and her 6 kids and the brother, the grandmother, and some other people. I don't even remember. But we're all living in this house. And I came home and I think I was going to take a bath or something because we didn't have showers in our house back then. I didn't. I wasn't balling like that. No showers, just tub. So I go to get in the tub, but I noticed the tub was dirty. So I go to get this Clorox, right? So I go get the Clorox to clean the tub and I went to put it back. And my uncle says to me, he comes up. So he was ex-military. He served in Vietnam. He was a 3rd degree black belt. Really stand-up guy. So he comes in and he says to me, he said, hey, he says, well, my name wasn't Diva, but y'all know me as Diva. So he says, hey, Diva, what did you do with the Clorox? I said, oh, it's in the bathroom. He was like, well, why didn't you put it back? I was like, oh, I'm sorry, I forgot. He was like, you need to put it back right now. I was like, okay. And when you address me as yes, sir. Yes, sir. Now, my uncle, like I said to you, served in Nam, 3rd degree black belt. It was very common in my household, and especially when interacting with him, to address him as sir. Nothing out the ordinary, but I could tell he was angry. So I went to do that, put it back, and then he followed me into my room. I believe at this point, my sister Rachel and I used to share a room. I believe this is when we shared a room. So I go back to my room and then he says, you think you're tough, don't you? No, sir. You think you're tough? No, sir. Pushes me down. I fall onto the couch. And I kind of sat there and I was like, he was like, when I tell you to do something, you do it. Now, I did what he told me to do. Not really sure why he was angry. And, at this point, I'm just like, I don't know what happened. So I just went, okay. And I stood up. And he looked at me and he says, when I tell you to sit down, you sit down. Pushes me down again. I stood up. I said, no, sir. Do what I tell you to do. Pushes me down. I stand up. Sir, I didn't do anything. And at this point, I was trying to leave the room. So then the next time he pushed me and asked me to sit down, I refused because he kept putting his hands on me, which was weird for him. I don't know. And he was like, you think you're tougher than me? You want to know what it's like to really be in a fight? And he goes on and on and on and on. And so now I'm standing up because at this point I know I cannot back down. I can't back down. And I know somebody probably watching was like, well, why do you just sit down? I don't know. It wasn't about sitting down as much as it was why all of a sudden was he so angry and so physical with me. So I started screaming for my mom. I'm like, Mom. And when I do that, he gets more angry. We get into a sprawl, rolling around, and all I remember is laying on my back on the floor, him on top of me. Like I said, I was about 16. I was probably 140 pounds at this point, 150 pounds, and he was like 220, 225. And he's on top of me. He was like, when I tell you to do something, you do it. When I tell you to sit down, you sit down. When I tell you, and I'm like, I didn't do anything. And I'm like, Mom, I'm calling my mom, Mom, trying to get her to come. And she was like, and she said to me, she said, David, just do what he says. And something inside of me broke. Not physically. Emotionally. Something inside of me broke. Not because clearly I was in a physical altercation that I was losing, but because in that moment, my mom didn't have my back. I continued to tussle with him. She finally says to him, she says, Kwame, get off of her. Get off of me. And I looked at my mom, I looked at him, and I left the house. So I left my home at 16. Mind you, I already lived in boarding school where I could come home on the weekends, but after 16, I never moved back home. That was pretty much the end of that. So today, the phone call was my mother apologizing for not accepting, not believing me in that moment, not believing I didn't do anything, not understanding that, he was hurting me. I was in a fight with my uncle. He was hurting me. But she called to apologize. My mother is 73 now. She called to apologize. And my response to her was, Mom, I let that go a long time ago. She said, and she starts crying, and I start crying, getting emotional now. But I said, I let that go a long time ago. And I said, as parents, because now I have 2 boys, I said, as parents, we do everything in our power to try to do the right thing that we know how. I said, you grew up in a different time. I was growing up through a time in transition. And I said, you had no reason not to believe your brother. And I was a good kid. I said, but you had no reason not to believe your brother. So you figured for him to be so irate and angry with me, I did something wrong, though it was not the case. But I said, I'm not angry with you. And I said, I need you to let it go. And she was like, I love you. And I'm like, oh, I love you too. So I had to give you all this backstory to say this. Fuck your trauma, right? And mind you, that's not even major. I mean, we all go through things, and I've been through tons of shit in my life, and that's just one particular incident, one particular story. But fuck your trauma. And I know when people saw that title, it was like, oh, she's being insensitive to people's mental health and what they're going through. But this is the thing. We all go through shit. We all go through levels of shit. And if you want to get into a pissing contest about who had the hardest life, I'm quite sure we can all find somebody, if not 100 somebodies, that's had it worse than the next person. But I'm here to tell you this. You got to let it go. You got to let it go. If you do not let it go, it will destroy you. Now, I say that because at 73, what I noticed is my mother still hadn't let it go. And today was the day she let it go of the guilt for not standing up for me in that moment. And I let it go a long time ago, because in that moment, I learned one thing and one thing only. And I firmly believe it's part of the reason why I am the way I am, and I have the character I have. And I told my mother, I said, I'm everything I am because of you. But I will say this. That moment taught me to stand up and never back down. Now, in hindsight, what we now know is my uncle was a Vietnam vet. And in hindsight, we also know that he clearly had PTSD. Diva now understands that. Diva at 16 didn't know. My mother at that point in her life didn't know. Nobody was really talking about PTSD in the early 90s, late 80s. Nobody's really talking about PTSD. It would just be, oh, that person is crazy. So in hindsight, right? He was crazy. We didn't know he was crazy. She had no reason not to believe him. Something traumatic happens, but the question is, do I as an individual hold on to that forever? No. You got to let that shit go. You got to let it go. And a lot of times in the Do Work method, I talk to you guys about letting things go. Now, whether you do it on your own or do it through therapy, that's 100% up to you. But you got to let it go. You have to move on. Because if not, it only hinders and hurts you. Why would you want to constantly relive trauma over and over again? Let that go. Do you know your body literally has a physical response to trauma? When you think about it again, when you relive it, hence why when I sat here and I told you this story, I felt my body tense up. I got emotional again. There are physical responses to constantly reliving trauma. So the thing is this, I'm not telling you to ignore your trauma. I'm not telling you that everything you went through is not valid. What I'm telling you is this. Everyone goes through shit. You have to accept what happened to you and figure out how to work past it and do better. And if you can't do it on your own, if you can't do it through the sound of people who support you and love you, that's what therapy is for. Let it go. So I say all that to say, as I sat with my mother today, well, look at me, I'm in it, right? I wasn't even sitting with her. I was on the phone. I let it go. I let it go. I let it go for me years ago. And I hope today, when I spoke with her, that we let it go. But I need you to walk away knowing this. Everyone has trauma. Stop thinking you're not going to go through shit. Stop thinking because you're a great person, things shouldn't happen to you, because they're going to happen. And for those of you who don't know, my mother is a preacher. And one of the things I said to her on the phone before we hung, I said, Mom, biblically speaking, everybody goes through stuff, whether they're on the side of right or the side of wrong. Everybody has a different level of trauma and things they need to go through. But what we do need to do is we have to learn to let it go. Because until you let it go, you cannot move forward. In any capacity, a facet of your life, you got to let it go. So if you're sitting here and you're in the sound of my voice and you're watching my video and you're like, is she talking to me? Then that means I'm talking to you. I encourage you to take steps to move past your trauma and let it go. How do we move past trauma? By doing better. By trying not to repeat the cycle. That's it. That's all we can do. But what you can't do and what you shouldn't do is just live in the past. What you shouldn't do is let it keep you in prison. What you shouldn't do is let it stop you from growing. You got to learn to let things go. Man, That's all I got today. Make sure to subscribe to the newsletter. Go over to divarichards.com. I should have got BetterHelp to sponsor this today. This wasn't even supposed to be a BetterHelp episode, but shout out if you need therapy, check out BetterHelp. Get yourself a therapist. They got so many options out there. But I want you all to learn to let it go. And remember, nothing changes unless you do. Nothing changes unless you do the work, family. Let's go.